A big hello to all sales creators, or what I like to call ourselves Salestors. I'm Ishita, and here's wishing all the women out there a very happy International Women's Day. The occasion is big, and Salestors is about to complete 6 months. To celebrate the occasion, here is Salestors' first ever video interview with an international keynote speaker and a revered sales strategist, author of best-selling and most coveted sales books and ebooks, a LinkedIn influencer, and a woman who is amongst world's top B2B sales experts of all time, Jill Konrath. What is the best way to connect with the CXOs of big companies, especially in the post-COVID era? Like earlier, we could for cold calling, especially, we could simply pick up the phone and get the board line number, pick up the phone, maybe try and connect with the right person and the usual means. But COVID really changed that. So, what do you think is the best way today to connect with the CXOs of big companies?
I think that there should be multiple ways and that there is no best ways, because how do you know how they choose to communicate? I think email, social media,
Yeah,
LinkedIn, I mean, it's where is this person? But it's also the quality of what you're putting out there, because most people are still talking about, I'd love to meet with you, we've got this exciting new technology, or we just launched our really super duper company, and I would love to meet with you to tell you about everything we could do for you, and that doesn't work. And excuse me, so many people I say, well, you just have to make more calls, more emails, more and more and more. And the thing that I always look at is what is better. If it's not working, why would you send out more bad,
that's
bad messages? But phone, email, social media. If it's not working, you have to look at what you're doing and saying, what can I change? What are the fundamental things that I can change? And something as simple as an email, you can change your subject line, you can change the first sentence, you can change the length of your email, you can change the visual impact of your email, you can focus on a different aspect of what you can do for people. You can think of, instead of thinking of, I got to tell them everything I can do in one email, you can think of, how can I spread out my message over multiple contacts via email, social media, the phone. I mean, you really have to think differently about it. You can't just do more. I mean, that's stupid. You have to push the better button, but you have to find out what's better, which means you have to do a little bit of studying and you have to experiment. And I love the word experiment, by the way, because you don't know. And if you're experimenting, you're never failing.
that's true.
You're never failing. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try a different subject line. Oh, that didn't work so well. What else can I try? And it just gives you the freedom to, I mean, you're all about creating, and it gives you the freedom to create new ways. And to me, sales is an act of creation. And people don't realize that. Like you create a meeting, you create a presentation, you create a demonstration. And yes, you're doing stuff maybe that the company gives you, but the reality is you're in charge of the ambient, the feelings from the meeting. You're in charge of what is the objective for the meeting. You're in charge of, this is my objective. What do I have to put in place to create this outcome? How do I want people to feel at the end of the meeting? And what is it going to take to get them to feel this way versus that way? And so to me, it's an act of creation, a presentation, act of creation, a simple subject line, act of creation.
Oh, act of creation. That's one thing that I'm going to remember forever, I guess. And in fact,
Well, it's true. People don't know that. And a lot of people go to companies and they're given scripts and follow the script. And this is how we do it. And so many of the companies that I see, there are ways to make it better, and if we're not constantly looking at what else can we create and getting sales teams involved and saying, this is what we're doing. Let's see if we can create something a little bit different that gets us better results. And to me, that's an act of creation. It's involving a whole team in the creation process.
yeah, I think this is exactly what you were referring to in your book, Snap Selling, which is basically simple, invaluable, aligned, and prioritized selling. So you
Right.
had mentioned that sales is an outcome and not a goal. Although,
Yes.
there was one question when I had read that, there was one question in my mind that outcomes are not always in your hands, whereas goals are preset. So, because sales
Yes.
has always had an image of being the most numbers and result oriented profession. So,
Mhm.
can you explain when you say sales is more an outcome and not a goal, what would it imply?
It implies that there are multiple steps along the way, and you have to do your job at each step to keep things moving. I mean, if your focus is on the sale as the primary thing, you're going to be missing things. But if your focus is on the customer
Yeah.
and what are their needs, what are their issues, what are their challenges, and it's not just, I mean, the customer has multiple decisions to make. Number one, do they even want to change? And number two, what is the best thing to change to? And it's so many decisions. It's very confusing these days for people. I know that research from Gartner shows that people are so overwhelmed with the quantity and quality of information out there, and also with the competing information. You know that one person says you have to do it this way, one company, another one says, oh no, it's this way. And then so now we have information that battles against each other, but you also have multiple decision makers in multiple countries, perhaps, that are seeing things differently. So sales becomes an act of facilitation and keeping the process moving and helping people sort through the complexities of the deal that's going through or the change that they're going to make. It's a change initiative. But it really becomes not a push, let me try to sell you this. It's really a whole lot more complicated than that. And if we're pushing, you don't get the outcome you want. I mean, seriously, you don't get the outcome you want. But if you lean back and say, let's try to figure this out and see if it makes sense. And there are times it doesn't make sense to work with you. And that's hard to walk away from, but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And I think, so I have like you mentioned, that we need to focus on customers. Problem occurs when we focus on sales and not customers. So, what is the best strategy to get inside a customer's head? What all do we need to do to really understand that? Okay, obviously our strategy needs to change with every customer. But
Yes.
now what is the best? Is there like a formula to understand that? Okay, this is how I get inside this customer's head before the meeting.
Is there a formula? I wish there would be like a total formula, but I mean, first, if your company gives you any information, I consider that simply a starting point. If they tell you that here's the buyer persona and here's the issues and challenges that they're facing, to me, that's a starting point. I think one of the best things that I would recommend is if your company already has some existing customers, that you go interview your existing customers and just really focus on, especially customers that have been working with your company for less than a year, but more than 3 to 6 months. And I say that because those customers are the ones who remember what it was like before they brought your product or service in. And so they can have an interesting conversation with you about, what were they doing before? What were the issues and challenges? What motivated them to change? What were the biggest frustrations in making the change? Since they've made the change, what have they learned? What have they discovered? What value has it provided them? What surprised them about it that they didn't expect as an outcome? It's really, first of all, I think, just getting to know your customers. Anybody who's new in sales should be, doing some interviews with people and just, maybe you can't go in depth on one phone call, but you can pick away at it. And if you're talking to that person again, you can come back and you say, when we talked before, you mentioned this. Can I ask you a few more questions about that? And it's just being genuine and focusing on learning. It's telling them that it really interested you and you hadn't thought of it that when you want to know more. And people, if you ask for help, typically are willing to give you some. So to me, the customers are our best asset, and finding out from them. In terms of what else can you learn, one of the things that I've always done again, I worked with so many different companies as a consultant, and my job was to figure out what mattered to the clients, and I had to come in without maybe any background in the airline industry or the cargo industry, which is what you're from. I might not know anything about that, but I had to do the quick immersions. Interviewing the more experienced people in the company is a good thing. I always found to look at the content that the company provided. And the company typically puts out these, glowing terms about, let's just use the word in the cloud right now. It's in the cloud, okay? And you go, and they're bragging like in the cloud that it's really exciting or the latest technology. And so I always would look at it and go, okay, so if it's not in the cloud, they're bragging about it. But if it's not in the cloud, what issues are they having? What is their current situation? What are the issues and challenges that they could be facing because they don't know of a better way? They're just doing it. What are the repercussions of doing it that way? Because if it's slower, well, what else does that impact? And does it have any upstream or downstream ramifications? Who else might it affect in the organization? Where are the problem points? But I would always work with companies and talk to their people about the opposite of what they were bragging about. So it's a way it was always a way, it's a reverse engineering to find out, because if you ask people what can your product do, they list all these glowing benefits. Yeah. But as a seller, you need to understand what they're doing instead of that. And what are the typical situations, common situations you'll run into. So there's a lot of ways. There's not one way, but the more you learn, the better it is. And even another thing that I think is really crucial in selling is something that I call trigger events. And it's the only thing that I have ever mentioned in all 4 of my books. It's fascinating to me. It's the only thing that I've specifically written on. Other things would be in there, but trigger events to me are such a catalyst. A trigger event is something that happens either internal to a company, like new leadership, a change in direction, and a new market segment, a new product launch. It's something that's happening within the company. Or it could be outside, like COVID, or change in government regulations, change in the tax structure, change in your buyer's market. But what it does, a trigger event makes people step back and say, well, how else can we do this? Or what are, our priorities have just changed. And it loosens up the decision process and makes them open to looking at other things than they weren't looking at before. So again, I would be asking what triggered this decision? What was it that happened? What was it that happened prior to you deciding you wanted to do something different? And the answers are always fascinating, because now you learn trigger points. And if you're selling, and if you know what the triggers are, you can watch for them, and you can keep your eyes open and see if companies are doing that based on researching or just knowing that things are changing in the market. For example, this is a silly one: gas prices. Okay, now they're going up here in the US right now. And for some companies, that's a really big deal, because they have fleets of trucks.
Okay.
Like food companies have fleets of trucks that go out and deliver their products. That's costly. And it's an issue. It's a trigger event. If you think gas prices, well, what if I'm selling human resources systems, things to the HR department? That's not related to gas, but that's not true. It is related to gas if you start really thinking out, because if the gas prices are going up, executives in the company are thinking, we have to control costs, and we can't control these costs. What other costs can we impact? And if human resources can come up with a way to reduce their costs, then it will help. And they'll look good, because they'll be bringing ideas that'll help reduce overall costs during a time when gas prices are up. So you see what I'm saying? Like the increase in gas prices can change the priorities of the organization to, we need to conserve cash, we need to increase operational efficiency, we need to do these things. And so one trigger can have an impact over here. And if you're smart and you start thinking about it, you can be the first one in the door talking to them about the increased gas prices that, and you're sure that they're under pressure right now to reduce costs. You have some ideas that might help them increase the efficiency of their system and help the company at this time. And research shows that the first person in the door with an idea like this has a huge percentage of closing. Like, I can't remember the exact, but it's like 80% close rate if you're the first one in with new ideas that are tied to a trigger event. So
basically, these are the causes that ultimately, and if we want a desired effect, we have to kind of do the back calculation and look at what will cause this chain of events to ultimately reach that desired effect.
Yeah. It's really interesting to me. And like I mentioned gas prices, I was recently speaking in Louisiana, another state here in the US, and they're in oil country. And so I mentioned the rise of gas prices, and they've got refineries there. And so I said, well, how will that affect things? And here's what they said. Oh, that's great. The gas prices went up. All of the people in our area will have more money to spend on all those things that they couldn't get before. So the increase in gas prices has different impacts depending on what you're doing.